There was something in the air that day. Not the smell of mud, not the smell of pig manure. It was the smell of dirty business about to go down. You know that smell, when somebody's planning to play dirty but thinks they're being clever about it. I'd been smelling that scent ever since the HOA Karen moved in next door. And that morning, when I saw the police cruiser parked inside my property for the 4th time, I knew the game had officially begun. If you've ever lived next to an HOA Karen, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe some of you watching are dealing with the exact same situation right now. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, because I'm curious if there are others out there fighting the same battle we were. I'm Reed Carmichael, 3rd-generation owner of this Texas ranch, and I'll be honest, there was a time recently when I almost sold this place. My boy Mason needed college money, bills were piling up, and the easy way out would have been to take the cash and run. But something told me to hold on. Little did I know that decision would drag us into the fight of our lives. That Tuesday morning, I was checking on the pigs when I noticed Officer Miles Hendrick's patrol car parked right in the middle of my property. Not at the edge, not on the road, but smack in the middle like he owned the place. 3rd time in 2 weeks. I walked over, keeping my cool, and tapped on his window. Miles rolled it down, looking uncomfortable as hell, avoiding eye contact like a kid caught stealing cookies. "Morning, Officer Hendrick. Mind if I ask what you're doing parked on my private property again?" He shifted, still not looking at me. "Just routine patrol, Reed, making sure everything's secure." But there was something in his voice that didn't sit right. Before I could ask more questions, I heard the click-clack of high heels on gravel. Geraldine Whitford came strutting across my property like she owned it, wearing a pink business suit that had seen better days and carrying a fake leather briefcase. Her jewelry caught the morning sun, all flashy and cheap-looking. "Mr. Carmichael, perfect timing. I'm Geraldine Whitford, chairwoman of the Sunset Valley Estates HOA. We need to discuss some concerns about your operation here." She gestured toward my pig pens with distaste. Word around town was she'd moved here from up north after some kind of business failure, but nobody knew the details. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, though I had a feeling I wouldn't like the answer. Geraldine opened her briefcase and pulled out thick papers. "Environmental impact, noise pollution, frankly, the odor situation is becoming unbearable. We've documented violations." She thrust the papers toward me like a weapon. I flipped through them, page after page of complaints about pig smells to roosters crowing. It looked official, with fancy letterhead, but something felt off. "Ma'am, this ranch has been here 50 years. Your development's been here, what, 2? We were here first." Geraldine's smile got sweeter, somehow more threatening. "Mr. Carmichael, times changed, laws change. We're prepared to work with you, but we need compliance." Then she dropped the real hook. "I should mention, we've had interested parties inquiring about development opportunities here. High-value projects that could benefit everyone. You could walk away very wealthy if you cooperate." The way she said it made my blood run cold. This wasn't about pig smells. This was about money. Big money. And I'd ended up right in the middle of it. That's when I heard the barn door creak. Grandpa Chester emerged, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag, his weathered face taking in the scene with sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. At 72, Chester still stood tall, 40 years fixing airplane engines at Boeing before retiring to help run our farm. His hands were never clean, always stained with grease from whatever he was tinkering with. "Everything all right, Reed?" His voice was calm but carried that undertone that meant business. Geraldine turned with that fake smile. "You must be Mr. Carmichael Sr. I'm Geraldine Whitford from the HOA. We were discussing necessary improvements to bring this property up to modern standards." Chester looked her up and down, then glanced at Officer Hendrick, still sitting in his patrol car on our land. "Community standards? Last I checked, this here's private property, been in our family since '73. Your development wasn't even a dream back then." Steele entered his voice. Geraldine's smile faltered before snapping back. "Sir, I understand this might be difficult for someone of your generation, but progress waits for no one." That was her first mistake, underestimating Chester Carmichael. I saw something flicker behind his eyes, something dangerous. "Ma'am, I've dealt with folks who thought they could push around an old man before. Didn't work out too well for them." The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Officer Hendrick finally got out of his car, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Folks, let's keep this civil. No need for things to get heated." But sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool air. Something was very wrong with this picture, and I was starting to think Hendrick was in deeper than just following orders. Geraldine gathered her papers, fake smile now a grimace. We'll be in touch, Mr. Carmichael. Both of you. I hope you'll consider what's best for everyone." As she click-clacked away, I noticed her glancing back with an expression that looked less like concern and more like calculation. After they left, Chester and I stood in the morning quiet, processing what had happened. "Grandpa, what do you think that was really about?" He stared toward the Sunset Valley houses sitting like neat boxes. "Reed, I've seen this dance before, different players, same song. That woman's not interested in pig smells. She's interested in our land, and she's got backing, the kind that can afford to keep a police officer on payroll." My stomach dropped. "You think Hendrik is—" "I think that boy's in trouble, and our friend Geraldine's holding the strings. Questions is, what kind of trouble, and how far is she willing to go?" As if on cue, we heard distant machinery, heavy equipment from beyond our property line, hidden in the tree line. Chester's jaw tightened. "Reed, time we started paying closer attention. And maybe time I dusted off some old skills." But what really got my attention was what I found later that evening. A small electronic device attached to our mailbox, still warm from recent installation. Someone had been busy while we were distracted by Geraldine's theatrics. That evening, Chester called me to his workshop behind the barn. The place smelled of motor oil and metal shavings, tools hanging in perfect order, workbenches covered with half-finished projects. Tonight, there was purpose in Chester's movements as he pulled out equipment I'd never seen him use. "Reed, sit down. There's things I need to tell you about why I know how this game gets played." He gestured to an old chair while rummaging through a chest I'd always assumed held spare parts. "Back in '95, when you were in high school, I made the biggest mistake of my life." He pulled out a manila folder, thick with yellowed papers. The pain in his voice was raw, even after all these years. "Got into a legal battle with Hartwell Development Corporation over property boundaries. They claimed we'd been farming their land for years, had surveys and documents that looked official as hell." Chester spread out photographs and legal papers. "I was so sure I was right, so convinced justice would prevail, that I hired the most expensive lawyer I could find, spent $80,000 in legal fees, and lost 50 acres when all was said and done. I had never known the details of why our farm was smaller than the original deed indicated. The worst part wasn't the land or money. It was realizing he'd been played from the beginning. That development company had done this dance in 3 other counties, finding family farms, creating legal disputes, draining families financially, then buying remaining land for pennies on the dollar." Chester opened the folder, revealing photographs and what looked like surveillance notes. "After I lost, I spent 2 years learning how these operations work. Corporate land grabs disguised as legal disputes, paid-off officials, environmental concerns that mysteriously appear when development companies need them." He pulled out a newspaper clipping showing a woman remarkably similar to Geraldine standing next to a "for sale" sign. Different name then, Geraldine Hoffman, but same face, same tactics. She was the concerned citizen who complained about the Martinez family keeping too many chickens. The similarities were too striking for coincidence. Same fake smile, same cheap jewelry, same briefcase. "So, what's the play this time?" I asked, stomach sinking. Chester walked to his workbench, picking up a small electronic device no bigger than a matchbox. "This time we're ready. I've been working on old skills, putting together equipment to stay ahead." He showed me the device, a wireless camera system built from scratch using salvaged electronics. "Started installing these 3 days ago, after I noticed that police car making regular stops. Every entrance, every sightline, every place someone might operate, unseen." The old man was full of surprises. "Reed, I learned something important from losing that land. You can't fight dirty players with clean tactics. You have to be smarter, more prepared, and document everything, because when truth comes out, you better have proof nobody can argue with." We spent the next hour reviewing camera feeds on Chester's computer setup. The footage told a disturbing story. Geraldine had been on our property multiple times with different people, measuring and photographing. One feed showed her with a man in an expensive suit taking soil samples. Another caught her pointing toward our house while on her phone, gesturing like she was explaining layout to someone. "That's not random HOA harassment, Reed. That's reconnaissance. Someone's planning something big." Chester paused the video on the man in the suit. I did some digging. That's Marcus Webb, Senior Land Acquisition Specialist for AgriCorp Industries. They build industrial farming operations, massive processing facilities requiring hundreds of acres. The pieces were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture. So Geraldine isn't just some busybody HOA president. She's working for AgriCorp to soften us up, Chester nodded grimly. Create legal pressure, financial strain, community complaints, anything to make selling look smart. And if we don't sell voluntarily, he didn't need to finish. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Reed Carmichael, this is Betty Lou Harrison from Sunset Valley Estates. I live at 427 Maple Lane. Could we talk tomorrow? There are things about Mrs. Whitford you need to know. Chester read over my shoulder and raised an eyebrow. Betty Lou Harrison? She's the one with the garden backing our eastern fence. Seen her most mornings, tending vegetables. Always seemed friendly when we've waved. I was skeptical. Could be a setup. Send in the friendly neighbor to get information. But Chester was shaking his head. Maybe, but I don't think so. I've been watching neighborhood dynamics through the cameras. Betty Lou's been having heated conversations with Geraldine lately, and they don't look friendly. Yesterday, Geraldine left Betty Lou's house looking angry as hell, slammed her car door hard enough to rattle windows. He pulled up footage showing exactly that, Geraldine storming away while an older woman stood in the doorway looking upset. I think Mrs. Harrison might be having second thoughts about whatever Geraldine's been telling folks. We agreed to meet Betty Lou, but Chester insisted on precautions. Neutral ground, somewhere public, and we bring recording equipment. If she's legitimate, she won't mind us being careful. As we wrapped up, Chester pulled out one more item, a heavy-duty tow cable and winch system that looked capable of pulling a semi-truck. Reed, I hope I'm wrong about how far this might escalate, but if I'm right, we'll need more than cameras and careful planning. Sometimes you fight fire with fire, and sometimes that means getting your hands dirty. The gleam in his eye reminded me of childhood, whenever he was planning elaborate pranks. Chester wasn't just an old man who fixed airplane engines. He was a strategist, an engineer, and apparently he'd been preparing for war. But what really worried me was the realization that someone had been inside our property lines for weeks, watching, planning, documenting everything we did. The electronic device on our mailbox was just the beginning. Tomorrow, we'd find out how deep this conspiracy really went. Betty Lou Harrison turned out to be a retired school teacher who'd moved to Sunset Valley Estates looking for quiet, golden years. We met at Rosie's Diner on Main Street, halfway between our properties. She arrived carrying a manila folder and looking like she hadn't slept in days. Mr. Carmichael, Mr. Reed, I owe you an apology and explanation. I've been part of something terrible without realizing it. She settled into the booth with a heavy sigh. 3 months ago, Geraldine seemed like a godsend. Professional, concerned about property values and community standards. She told us your farm was a health hazard that would drive down home values if nothing was done. This wasn't what we'd expected. Betty Lou opened her folder, pulling out photographs. She gave me these pictures, said they showed violations of county health codes on your property. I believed her because why wouldn't I? She's HOA president with official documents. The photographs showed overcrowded, unsanitary pig pens and contaminated water sources that would indeed violate health regulations. Problem was, none were taken on our property. Mrs. Harrison, we've raised pigs for 50 years. Our operation is inspected twice yearly and we've never had violations. These pictures show conditions that don't exist on our farm. Betty Lou's face went pale. That's what I feared you'd say. Last week, driving past your property, I stopped to actually look for the first time. What I saw was nothing like these pictures. Healthy animals, clean facilities, a well-run family farm. She pulled out more documents. So I started researching. Called the county office about these violations Geraldine mentioned. There are no violations on file. None. Your last inspection report gave you high marks. But that wasn't the worst part. 2 days ago, I overheard Geraldine on a phone call. She was talking about timeline and payouts, mentioned a $500,000 finder's fee for securing the Carmichael property. Also something called AgriCorp and industrial development worth millions in revenue. Chester and I exchanged glances. Our suspicions confirmed by someone inside Geraldine's operation. The person on the phone was someone named Marcus, and they discussed soil composition reports and environmental impact studies. Geraldine said she had local authorities on board, and there wouldn't be legal obstacles once the property became available. Betty Lou's hands shook as she reached for her coffee. Yesterday, she came to my house with Officer Hendrick, wanted me to sign an affidavit stating I'd witnessed health code violations on your property. When I said I hadn't seen any violations, she got angry, really angry. She said I was being naive, that my property values were at stake, and I needed to decide whether I was part of the solution or part of the problem. Officer Hendrick looked uncomfortable the whole time, kept checking his watch like he wanted to be anywhere else. But he backed everything Geraldine said about legal consequences for homeowners who didn't cooperate. The implicit threat was clear. Chester leaned forward. Betty Lou, has Geraldine offered you money or compensation for cooperation? Betty Lou flushed red. How did you— Yes, she said, homeowners supporting the community improvement initiative would receive priority for new amenities once problematic properties were resolved. Mentioned a community center, enhanced landscaping, shopping area that would increase property values significantly. Also hinted at direct compensation for residents providing testimony supporting legal action. We spent another hour going over Betty Lou's observations. The picture was sophisticated and disturbing. Geraldine had backing from AgriCorp, cooperation from law enforcement, and a systematic plan to pressure us into selling. But there were exploitable weaknesses. Other residents don't know about the AgriCorp connection. They think this is about neighborhood standards. If they knew their HOA president was working with a corporation to force out a family farm for industrial development, most would be outraged. Chester was taking notes. What about Hendrick? You said he looked uncomfortable. Any idea what hold Geraldine has on him? Betty Lou lowered her voice. I asked around carefully. Officer Hendrick had disciplinary action 4 years ago, something about evidence handling in a drug case that got thrown out. Word is he was lucky to keep his job, and there are still questions about whether money changed hands. So Geraldine has leverage on him. That explains the illegal parking and backing her story about violations. We were dealing with coordinated conspiracy involving corporate interests, government corruption, and systematic neighborhood intimidation. Mrs. Harrison, I need one more favor, and it's dangerous. We need someone inside who can keep us informed. Betty Lou stared out the window toward both our properties. Those bastards lied to me, used me to help steal your land, threatened me when I asked questions. Hell yes, I'll help. What do you need? Chester smiled for the first time since this started. Just keep being the concerned neighbor. Go to HOA meetings, ask innocent questions, let us know about timeline changes or tactic escalation, and Betty Lou, be careful. If Geraldine figures out you're working with us, this could get ugly fast. As we left the diner, I felt we'd gained a crucial ally, but also the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about our farm anymore, it was about corruption, corporate greed, and people like Geraldine destroying lives for money. But what really chilled me was Betty Lou's parting comment. There's something else. Last night, I saw Geraldine meeting with a man in an expensive car. Texas plates, looked official. They were pointing toward your property, and his body language suggested he wasn't just another corporate consultant. I think she's got political connections we don't know about yet. The conspiracy was bigger than we'd imagined, and time was running out to expose it before they made their final move. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No visits from Geraldine, no mysterious patrol car appearances, no surveyors skulking around our property lines. Chester's cameras showed normal suburban activity, but something felt wrong, like the calm before a storm you can feel in your bones. That feeling proved justified when Betty Lou called Thursday morning, urgency in her voice. Reed, you and Chester need to get over here right now. Something big is happening, and I think you're about to be blindsided. We found her in her backyard, pointing toward a black Cadillac Escalade parked at Geraldine's house. That car's been there 2 hours. The man who got out had the kind of presence that screamed serious money or political connections. Chester adjusted his binoculars, studying the license plate. Texas plate, Bexar County registration, San Antonio area. That's where state regulatory offices are, and where AgriCorp has regional headquarters. As we watched, Geraldine's front door opened, and out stepped a man who looked like Central Casting's version of corrupt politician. Silver hair, expensive suit, gold watch catching sunlight, and that practiced politician's smile. He was followed by Geraldine, practically bouncing with excitement. Then Marcus Webb, from Chester's surveillance footage. That's not just a business meeting, Chester muttered. That's a strategy session, and they're confident enough to meet in broad daylight. Betty Lou had positioned herself to catch conversation fragments through Geraldine's open windows. The older man, Geraldine called him Uncle Teddy. He was talking about timelines and legal frameworks, fast-tracking environmental assessments, and bypassing standard review processes. The pieces fell into place, painting a worse picture than we'd imagined. Uncle Teddy had to be Theodore Whitford. A quick phone search confirmed it. Theodore Whitford, county commissioner for 12 years, zoning board chairman, and, according to his biography, a strong supporter of economic development and agricultural modernization. Reed, we're not just fighting an HOA president and corporation, Chester said quietly. We're fighting a family operation with political connections at county level. That changes everything. Before I could respond, Officer Hendrick's patrol car pulled up. But this time, instead of reluctant discomfort, Miles got out with purpose and confidence, walking to the porch group like he belonged there, shaking hands with Theodore like old friends. "Son of a bitch," I whispered. "He's not being coerced. He's part of the team." Chester was taking pictures with his telephoto lens. "No, Reed, look closer at his body language. He's trying to project confidence, but watch his hands, his posture. That's a man who's scared and trying to hide it." Betty Lou's phone buzzed. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7 p.m. to discuss critical community health and safety issues requiring immediate action." She's making her move. We watched as the porch meeting continued. Theodore pulled out legal documents, spreading them on a patio table while others leaned in. Marcus Webb pointed toward our property, making sweeping gestures like describing construction plans. The scene felt like military commanders planning invasion. "They're not just pressuring us to sell anymore," Chester observed. "They're going to force us off through legal action, with local political structures lined up to support them." As the meeting broke up, we witnessed the money shot. Theodore handed something to Officer Hendrick, an envelope that Miles tucked quickly into his jacket. But it was Hendrick's face that told the real story. His eyes darted around nervously, his hand trembled slightly as he pocketed the envelope, and when Theodore clapped him on the shoulder, Miles actually flinched. The man wasn't corrupt by choice. He was trapped, desperate, probably more afraid of these people than we were. "Chester, please tell me you got that on camera." He patted his equipment bag with satisfaction. "Every second from multiple angles with audio enhancement. That envelope transaction is going to be very interesting evidence." But even as he said it, I could see concern in his eyes. We were gathering evidence of corruption, but we were also making ourselves targets of people with serious power. "What's our next move, Grandpa? Because I get the feeling we're about to be hit with everything they've got." Chester was quiet, staring toward our property with that thinking expression I'd learned to recognize. "Reed, I've been preparing for this moment since I lost that land 25 years ago. I swore then that if anyone tried to take what belonged to my family again, I'd be ready." His voice carried weight of old pain and new determination. "Tonight, at that HOA meeting, they are announcing their plan to force us out. Legal action, emergency health orders, whatever they think will work fastest. But they don't know we've been documenting everything. We have inside sources, and I've been preparing some surprises." Betty Lou looked between us with growing understanding. "You're not just going to fight them in court, are you?" Chester's smile was grimmer than winter. "Betty Lou, sometimes you have to speak a language bullies understand. And tomorrow, they're going to get a vocabulary lesson they'll never forget." The HOA meeting that evening was manipulation and intimidation masterclass. Betty Lou attended as our eyes and ears while Chester and I monitored from his surveillance setup. Geraldine had packed the meeting with supporters promised benefits for backing the Community Improvement Initiative. She presented a slideshow of misleading information, doctored photographs, and official-looking documents painting our farm as a public health crisis requiring immediate intervention. Theodore appeared via video call, lending official weight by discussing county regulations and enforcement mechanisms. The meeting ended with unanimous vote, minus Betty Lou's abstention, to pursue legal action for immediate closure of our non-compliant agricultural operation. As neighbors filed out, many shooting suspicious glances toward our property, I realized we'd just been declared war on by an entire community. "Chester, I hope you know what you're doing, because we just became the most hated family in a 10-mile radius." He looked at me with that gleam that meant trouble for someone. "Reed, tomorrow morning, when Officer Hendrick parks his patrol car on our property to serve those papers, he's getting a lesson in why you don't mess with the Carmichael family. And the whole neighborhood's going to watch." Friday morning came with the clarity that follows hard decisions. Chester was up before dawn, moving around his workshop with focused energy of a man who'd been planning this moment for months. I found him surrounded by machinery and cables that looked military-grade rather than farm equipment. "Morning, Reed. Today's the day we stop playing defense and start fighting back." He gestured toward impressive equipment he'd assembled overnight. "Everything's ready. Cameras positioned, recording equipment tested, and our little surprise for Officer Hendrick is primed and waiting." The centerpiece was the industrial winch system he'd shown me earlier, but now I could see it was part of something much more elaborate. "Grandpa, walk me through this one more time, because I want to make sure we're not doing anything that'll land us in jail." Chester chuckled, but steel lay behind it. "Reed, everything we're about to do is perfectly legal. Hendrick has no right to park his patrol car on our private property. When he does today, and he will, because they need to serve those papers with maximum intimidation, he'll be trespassing. As property owners, we have the right to remove illegally parked vehicles. He pointed toward the elaborate pulley system near the fence line. That winch is rated for 20,000 pounds. Hendrick's patrol car weighs about 4,000. The math works fine. But that wasn't the end of Chester's preparations. During the night, he'd also worked on what he called the mud pit. You remember that low spot near the east fence where water collects after rain? I'd been doing creative landscaping. What used to be minor drainage was now a carefully engineered mud bog 10 feet across and 3 feet deep. Yes, perfect consistency, thick enough to trap a vehicle, not deep enough to cause actual damage. Mixed in some natural fertilizer from the pig pens for authentic farm smell. If Hendrick wants to park where he doesn't belong, he's getting a real taste of farm life. The setup was positioned so anyone driving onto our property would naturally end up exactly where Chester wanted them. It was ingenious, diabolical, and completely legal. But looking at my grandfather's face as he explained his plan, I felt a chill of worry. Chester, are we going too far? What if this backfires? What if they use this against us? He stopped adjusting his equipment and looked at me with those sharp gray eyes. Reed, son, I've been thinking about that all night. Lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'm about to make the same mistake I made 25 years ago, letting anger make decisions instead of wisdom. His voice was quieter now, more human, but then I remember that envelope changing hands yesterday, and I know these people aren't going to stop until they get what they want. Betty Lou called at 8 a.m. with neighborhood intelligence updates. Reed, they're making their move this morning. Geraldine's been calling everyone, telling them to watch from their windows because justice is finally being served. She's also got that AgriCorp character parked down the street in a rental car with professional camera equipment. Chester nodded with satisfaction, but I caught him checking and rechecking his equipment with nervous energy I'd never seen before. They want a show? We'll give them a show they'll never forget. Betty Lou, make sure you're recording from your side. This is going to be historic. Around 9:30, Theodore Whitford's Escalade drove slowly past our property, passengers clearly examining our operation for last-minute legal vulnerabilities. Chester watched through binoculars, his jaw tight. Reed, you having second thoughts about this? I looked at my grandfather, really looked at him. 72 years old, hands that had built airplane engines for 40 years, eyes that had seen his family lose land to corporate greed, and now preparing what might be the most audacious act of his life. Grandpa, I'm scared as hell, but I'm more scared of what happens if we don't fight back. Chester nodded slowly. Good answer, son. Fear keeps you smart. Anger makes you stupid. We're walking a fine line here. At exactly 10 a.m., Officer Hendrick's patrol car turned into our driveway. Instead of stopping at the gate, he drove straight onto our property, past no trespassing signs, parking in the middle of our front yard like he owned it. Chester and I watched from the barn as Miles got out, straightened his uniform, and pulled out thick legal documents. Reed, you go talk to him, keep him occupied, I'll handle technical aspects. There was something almost cheerful in Chester's voice, but I could see his hands shaking slightly as he picked up the remote control. Chester, you sure about this? I asked one last time. He looked at me with a mixture of determination and something that might have been fear. Reed, I've been sure about this for 25 years. Today's the day we find out if I'm right. I walked out to meet Officer Hendrick, my heart pounding like a drum, knowing that in the next few minutes, our lives would change forever. Behind me, I could hear Chester muttering to himself. Not the confident engineer I'd always known, but an old man about to take the biggest risk of his life. God help us all, he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, because after today, there's no going back. The weight of what we were about to do settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. But it was too late to change course now. The die was cast, the trap was set, and Officer Hendrick was walking straight into the moment that would define the rest of our lives. The aftermath of Officer Hendrick's impromptu mud bath was everything Chester had hoped for, and more. Within minutes, our property was surrounded by vehicles. News crews alerted by Betty Lou's network of reformed HOA neighbors, county officials responding to Miles's panicked radio calls, and a growing crowd of curious onlookers, drawn by the spectacle of a police car, buried axle deep in pig farm mud. But the real entertainment was just getting started. Geraldine arrived in her beat-up Honda Civic, screeching to a halt at our front gate with all the drama of a soap opera villain making her grand entrance. She emerged from her car wearing what looked like a courtroom outfit, another thrift store business suit, and her collection of fake jewelry, clearly expecting to preside over our public humiliation. "What have you done?" she screamed, rushing toward the mud pit where Officer Hendricks sat in his patrol car, looking like a defeated general after a particularly embarrassing battle. "This is assault! This is destruction of public property! This is—" She was so focused on the spectacle that she didn't watch where she was walking, and her high heels immediately sank into the soft ground around the mud pit. With a shriek that could be heard 3 counties over, Geraldine Whitford, self-appointed queen of Sunset Valley Estates, tumbled backward into the carefully prepared pig manure that Chester had artistically scattered around the perimeter of his mud bog. The fake Chanel bag she'd been clutching opened as she fell, spilling its contents, more fake jewelry, unpaid bills, and what looked like a thick envelope marked AgriCorp consulting fee across the aromatic landscape. Chester, who had been watching the proceedings with the serene satisfaction of a master craftsman, calmly activated his public address system, another of his mechanical marvels that he'd apparently been saving for just this moment. His voice echoed across the property and into the crowd of spectators. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share some recordings that might interest you all." What followed was a carefully edited compilation of surveillance footage and audio recordings that told the entire story of Geraldine's conspiracy with AgriCorp. The hidden cameras had captured everything: meetings with corporate representatives, discussions about finder's fees, conversations about forcing us off our land for industrial development, and, most damning of all, the envelope of money we'd seen Theodore Whitford hand to Officer Hendrick just the day before. But Chester's presentation wasn't finished. As Geraldine struggled to extract herself from the mud while maintaining some shred of dignity, the public address system continued with recorded phone conversations that Betty Lou had managed to capture using equipment Chester had provided. Geraldine's voice, clear as day, discussing timeline acceleration, discussing backup plans for legal pressure, and, most incredibly, discussing contingency plans that involved making the family farm unlivable if they couldn't be forced out through conventional means. The crowd's mood shifted from amusement to outrage as they realized they'd been witnessing not just a neighbor dispute, but a coordinated conspiracy involving corporate fraud and political corruption. That's when the cavalry arrived, though not the cavalry Geraldine had been expecting. Agent Maria Santos of the Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped out of an unmarked sedan, followed by 2 other agents and a representative from the Texas Attorney General's office. Chester's old friend from his Boeing days had been very interested in the evidence we'd been gathering, and federal investigation into AgriCorp's land acquisition practices had been ongoing for months across multiple states. "Mrs. Whitford, Mr. Hendrick, you're both under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and violation of federal racketeering statutes." Agent Santos's voice cut through the chaos like a knife through butter. "You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right." The next 30 minutes were a masterclass in how quickly a seemingly powerful conspiracy can collapse when exposed to daylight. Theodore Whitford arrived in his Cadillac Escalade, expecting to oversee our legal defeat, only to find FBI agents waiting for him with their own set of handcuffs. Marcus Webb, from AgriCorp, tried to disappear into the crowd, but was identified and detained by federal agents who'd apparently been tracking him for months. Officer Hendrick, still sitting in his mud-covered patrol car, broke down completely and began confessing to everything: the envelope of money, the falsified reports, the illegal surveillance of our property, and his knowledge of at least 6 other family farms that had been targeted by similar schemes across Texas. Betty Lou, who had been recording everything from her strategic position near the fence line, became an instant local hero when she provided federal agents with weeks of documentation about Geraldine's operation. The other residents of Sunset Valley Estates, realizing they'd been manipulated into supporting a criminal conspiracy, turned on their former HOA president with the fury of people who'd been made fools of. Several of them approached us to apologize and offer support, explaining that they genuinely believed they were protecting their property values and community standards. "We had no idea," said one neighbor, a retired teacher named Frank Morrison. "If we'd known Geraldine was working for some corporation to steal your land, we never would have supported any of this." As the police cars, FBI vehicles, and news crews finally began to clear out, Chester and I stood in our front yard surveying the aftermath of what would forever be known in local folklore as the Great Pig Mud Bath Incident. Officer Hendrick's patrol car was still stuck in the mud pit, though a tow truck was finally on its way to extract it. Geraldine's fake Chanel bag was still scattered across our property, its contents providing a paper trail of corruption that would keep federal prosecutors busy for months. Reed, Chester said, putting his arm around my shoulder, I've been waiting 25 years for this moment. Justice doesn't always come when you expect it, but when it comes, it's beautiful. Looking at the mud-covered evidence of our victory, I had to agree. Sometimes the best revenge is served with a side of pig manure and a healthy dose of mechanical engineering. The legal aftermath of what the local newspaper dubbed Mudgate moved with surprising speed. Federal prosecutors, armed with weeks of surveillance footage, recorded conversations, and financial documents scattered from Geraldine's fake purse, built an airtight case against the entire conspiracy. Geraldine Whitford was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit racketeering. Theodore Whitford lost his position as county commissioner and faced his own federal charges for corruption and abuse of public office. Agricorp, facing similar charges in 12 states, agreed to a $50 million settlement with affected families and a permanent injunction against their predatory land acquisition practices. Officer Miles Hendrick, who cooperated fully with federal investigators, received a reduced sentence and entered a witness protection program after his testimony helped expose similar corruption schemes in 4 other counties. The financial compensation we received, $250,000 in damages plus legal fees, was more money than our family had ever seen at one time. But more important than the money was the vindication. Our farm was officially designated as a protected agricultural heritage site, ensuring that no future development schemes could threaten our family's legacy. Delilah used part of the settlement money to open the Muddy Pig, a farm-to-table restaurant right on our property that became an instant success. City folks drove for hours to eat authentic farm food while sitting at picnic tables overlooking the famous mud pit, where Officer Hendrick's patrol car had met its fate. Mason, now something of a local celebrity as the kid whose grandpa dragged a cop car into pig mud, became the most popular storyteller in his school and developed a confidence that made his parents proud. Betty Lou Harrison became more than just an ally. She became family. Her experience with Geraldine's manipulation and her courage in helping us expose the conspiracy earned her a permanent place at our dinner table and a key role in managing the restaurant's operations. She also became something of a local activist, helping other families in surrounding counties who found themselves facing similar corporate pressure campaigns. I was retired and bored, she told a reporter from the Austin American-Statesman. Now I have a purpose again, making sure no other family goes through what the Carmichaels almost went through. Her network of former HOA neighbors, reformed and educated by their experience with Geraldine's deception, became a powerful force for protecting family farms and exposing corporate land grabs throughout East Texas. Chester, at 72 years old, became something of a folk hero. The story of his 25-year preparation for revenge, his mechanical ingenuity, and his refusal to be intimidated by corporate bullies resonated with people across the country. He received interview requests from national news programs, invitations to speak at agricultural conferences, and even an offer to write a book about his experience. But Chester preferred to stay close to home, spending his time mentoring other farmers who face similar threats and improving his surveillance and defense systems. Reed, he told me one evening as we sat on the front porch watching the sunset over our protected farmland, I've got enough stories for 10 lifetimes, but I'd rather live the rest of my life in peace, knowing our land is safe for your boy and his children after him. But our story wasn't quite finished. 3 months after Geraldine's sentencing, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside were 15 letters from farm families across 8 states, all describing similar experiences with HOA harassment, corporate pressure campaigns, and mysterious legal challenges to their property rights. One letter, from a ranching family in Montana, included a business card for Mega Farm Corporation and a note. This might be Agricorp under a different name. They approached us last month with the same tactics Geraldine used on you. Can you help? Chester read through all 15 letters with growing excitement, his engineer's mind already working on solutions and strategies. Reed, it looks like our little mud pit adventure was just the beginning. There are families out there who need our help, and I've got equipment to test and techniques to refine. As I write this, Chester and I are planning our first consulting trip to Montana, where the Henderson family is facing pressure remarkably similar to what we experienced with Geraldine. Our truck is loaded with surveillance equipment, legal recording devices, and detailed plans for what Chester calls Mud Pit version 2.0, an improved system that incorporates lessons learned from our encounter with Officer Hendrick's patrol car. Betty Lou is coming with us. bringing her expertise in neighborhood organizing and her talent for identifying which neighbors can be turned into allies. Delilah and Mason will hold down the farm and restaurant while we're gone, confident in the knowledge that our land is now protected by federal designation and Chester's reputation for creative problem solving. The Muddy Pig restaurant has become a pilgrimage site for families facing corporate intimidation, and our story has inspired resistance movements in dozens of rural communities. We've learned that our experience with Geraldine and AgriCorp was part of a much larger pattern of corporate land acquisition that targets family farms across America. But we've also learned that these schemes depend on secrecy, intimidation, and the isolation of their targets. When families fight back together, document everything, and refuse to be bullied, the corporate bullies usually find easier targets elsewhere. Chester's mud pit has become a symbol of creative resistance, and his surveillance techniques have been adopted by farming families from California to Maine. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms or lawyers or politicians. Sometimes it comes from an old man with 40 years of mechanical experience, a grandson willing to risk everything for his family's legacy, and a neighbor brave enough to choose truth over comfort. Sometimes it comes from a perfectly engineered mud pit, a winch system rated for 20,000 pounds, and the decision to fight dirty tactics with creative solutions. If you're facing your own Geraldine Whitford, your own corporate land grab, your own corrupt officials who think they can intimidate honest families, remember this: document everything, build alliances with your neighbors, and never underestimate the power of pig mud applied with precision and perfect timing. And if you need help, well, Chester Carmichael's got equipment to travel and scores left to settle. The mud pit is just the beginning.
QA Stories, where reality feels like fiction and fiction wishes it was this juicy. Hit that like before the next bombshell drops.